Okay, great. We've got a great group on the line, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to present findings from our publisher impact study today. And we first released brief findings from this study at the ARF's audience measurement event in New York just a couple of weeks ago. And since then, we've gotten a ton of interest from many of you on the line, as well as media coverage in the Wall Street Journal, Ad Exchanger, and some of you may have seen the coverage today in Media Post. So we're really excited to take you through this study in depth and to introduce the publisher impact insights to you today. So we are going to hold questions until the end, but we will address questions at the end. But throughout the content, we encourage you to submit questions through the chat box on your screen, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers today. Joline McGoldrick, Director of Research, is going to start us off, and then Hannah Pavalow, Research Analyst, both with Millward Digital, are going to take us through the findings of the Publisher Impact Study. So Joline, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Great. Super, Sarah. Thank you. Hello to everyone on the phone. So in this next 45 to 50 minutes, what we hope to show you is a few things. We hope to talk through in more depth the findings of our Publisher Impact Study. We'll start with, telling you about the why we thought there was a need to do this in the industry. We'll tell you about the methodology, the framework and dimensions that rose out of there, and then we'll end it with a case study so that you can see how this all really comes into play. What we hope this does is, one, we hope that this provides a little bit more nuance to this area, particularly programmatic, but also really how to value premium content. And two, we hope that for those of you on the phone, whether you're in programmatic or on the publisher side or on the brand side, that what we can do is give you some real tools for how to evaluate context, the context in which your advertising runs. So just some background on who we are. So Millward Digital is, we are the leaders in advertising, helping clients grow their brands through using digital. That's what we definitely strive to do. And so this webinar today is not, just for the purposes of showing you some new tools we have, but we really do, this year as part of our goal, we really do want to encourage both innovation in the industry, and we hope that this will start some dialogues on how we, as an industry, can really work to elevate the medium. So I want to start on this idea of brand, because brand is important not just from the perspective of helping our clients, advertisers, grow brands, but there's often this dimension that we miss, that sites for brands as well. And what we find in this research, to preview it for you, is that the site brand really does matter in shaping the overall advertising experience. So what is a brand? A brand is the set of associations, ideas, memories, and feelings in the mind of the consumer that help them to make choices more quickly, choices about attention, choices about perception, and even lower funnel purchase choices. So digital will only punch above its weight when its connection to brand building is understood. So this research really, in talking about how publishers build their brands and how publishers help sites build their brands, what we really hope that it does how we as publishers and advertisers and marketers work together to deal with these new innovations and these new challenges. So often with digital, because it sort of came after TV, there's this idea that it always needs to be fast, quick, and easy and cheap. And that is certainly true, but it's also important that we as an industry work to protect the integrity of the channel and the creative that runs on that channel. And right now, the publisher industry is a very challenged industry. And it's a challenged industry for a couple different reasons. We see it through our conversations with publishers, but there are three big challenges that publishers are facing. There's this challenge of quality differentiation, as a publisher being able to quantify how the influence of your brand is different and how your site-specific content can lead to a more valuable advertising experience than that of your competitors. There's a challenge in communicating added value, So sites have things that they do to enhance the experience of the creative. Premium content, for example, is one of them. But right now, there's no good way to quantify that. So we can say intuitively we know that this premium content is providing a better experience, but more than that, there's really not a way that we can quantify it and share this with those looking to purchase on our site. And then finally, and what's most germane to this research, is just the trends that we're seeing in commoditization, particularly audience-based buying, which is that, often audience-based buying is sort of reducing the value of sites to finding demographics and other characteristics thereby, and that really sort of threatens and challenges sites' premium content and value. So what these publisher challenges in their totality, what we saw was that there is a need that arises for a best practices playbook for publishers to really help to navigate the diversity of the ad environments and to help deal with the changes and challenges that they're facing. So just for context, I'm sure that most of you on the phone are familiar with programmatic. I'm sure there's many of you on the phone who probably represent programmatic. But for the benefit of anyone who's not quite as familiar with it, so what is programmatic advertising? What programmatic advertising does is it's great for reach because it really helps you put in the characteristics of the audience that you want to serve ads to. An algorithm is generated, and those audience members are found on the web, and they're served the targeted ads, and this is repeated again and again. So this is fast, and it's cheap, which are two qualities that we know are all very coveted. But, does programmatic ignore the missing piece? And we think it does, and that missing piece that we would posit is place, because the context in which you see a stimulus is important. And this, this is both validated in advertising research, and it really rests on this psychological theory of priming. What is priming really? It's that exposure to stimulus 1 is going to influence your reaction to stimulus 2. So rather than sort of launching into, Psych 101 here to talk about priming, I thought what I would do, and so for those of you at the ARF who saw this at the ARF, you'll recognize my examples. I thought what I'd do is I would show you some examples of priming gone wrong as it relates to advertising. So location matters, right? So here's an ad we see for Skyfalls. This is a James Bond movie. Quickly, you notice the actor, and then you notice that he is pointing a gun somewhere. And where? So you're primed to notice that. Where is that gun being pointed? It's being pointed at Abraham Lincoln. Probably terrible placement. Right? Let's look at another one like that. Childhood obesity. Don't take it lightly. Okay, so now we're primed to think of things that are potentially healthier, right? What do we see? McDonald's, my kind of shopping spree. Probably not the best priming for a McDonald's ad, right? Finally, in case we think that this only happens, on billboards and offline, here is a site, deaf.com. It's a community for deaf people. And what is the message that you don't want to communicate? Probably this: can you hear me now? So those are just some examples. We can see, right, stimulus A influences stimulus B, how you respond to and perceive stimulus B. So those bad examples really get us into this concept that place and context matters, but we want to be able to quantify that more, right? We want to be able to put some data behind this so that we can make business decisions and buying decisions based on some sort of factors that break place or context down to something a little bit less nebulous. So the publisher impact study, which we're going to talk about now, we conducted it we looked at this across 44 sites, most of the major sites, and then across 5 categories: news, finance, sports, food, and portals. And what we did is we drew from 2 different data sources. We drew from behavioral data sources and attitudinal data sources. The behavioral data sources came from our Compete Behavioral Panel, and we looked at specifically unique visits and page views, the average stay, visits per person, pages per visit, and then attention, which is a measure of the amount of time spent on that page over the total amount of time spent on the internet. And then we looked at attitudinal. So we fielded a survey of N equals 4,935. We were aiming for 1,000 per category. And we looked at impressions of sites' brands, feelings towards the sites, reasons for visiting sites, and impressions of advertising on those sites. So we put these two different data sources together, and we ran a factor analysis so that we could understand what are the forces that are shaping the site's brand and the experience of the audience across that site. And of the 43 independent variables that we looked at, we really came up with 6 main dimensions that ended up being important and form really the basis of what we think is the publisher impact framework. And I want to share that with you now. So this publisher impact framework really has 3 components to it. And you want to think of it along the dimensions of strength, really, and symmetry. So when we talk about strength, what we mean is site brand strength, right? So the brand of the site really does matter in setting the table for either a positive or a, let's call it less positive or negative ad experience. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's where you want your strength. You want the brand to have strength. In terms of symmetry, we want symmetry with the goals of the advertising campaign for looking at audience dynamics, because those audience dynamics work better for different types of content and different types of objectives. And then site personality, right? We want to have symmetry between the personality and the pedigree of the site and the personality and the pedigree of the advertising. So let's start by talking about site brand strength. So what site brand strength is we've really distilled this into a score. We're interested in looking at evaluating a site's brand power, the perceptions about the brand, and then the differentiators, and assigning this a score of 0 being a weak, very weak site, and 100 being a very strong site. And so to get to this measure of the site brand strength, we're really looking at 3 different components or 3 different parts. So site brand strength is made up of brand attitudes. So how desirable is the site? Do people trust the site? How does the site do in terms of shareability of content? Right? We're looking at the site in terms of utility. So what is the purpose of the visit? How useful is the site? And then finally, we're looking at the site along the scale of meaningful difference. Is the site meaningful? Is it different from its competitors? Is it salient? And what we see is that the strength of the site is influencing the sort of 4 outcome metrics, the 4 ad diagnostic metrics that are either preparing the site or not preparing the site for a positive ad experience. And those measures that the site brand strength is influencing are going to be ad fit, how well the brand fits how well the advertised brand fits with the site, ad favorability, ad trust, and then the usefulness of the ad. And what we see is that for sites that score highest on brand strength, right, we're considering 80 or above to be a site that scores or indexes very high on brand strength. But those sites are driving higher ad fit, higher ad favorability, higher ad trust, and higher ad usefulness. Now, while some of this is intuitive, right, if you trust the site more, you're going to trust the advertising more. What this really does is it provides publishers, and then by extension, agencies and advertisers and programmatics with a way to do a few things. The first thing that site brand strength really allows publishers to do is to benchmark what the value of their site is, right? And not just the value of their site, but how they do against competitors. Are you a stronger site than your top 2 competitors? And if so, why is that? What are the things that are driving that strength? If not, where do you need to improve to get on par with your competitors? The second thing it does is it really allows publishers to manage their brand a little bit. So internal decisions and external forces are all the time shifting the brand equity of a site or a publisher up or down. There's no real way to track this. So what this score does is it really allows sites to track their brand strength and brand equity so that they can see how these decisions are affecting that. Importantly, it really allows publishers to prove the value of their premium content and their placements, the value of their site overall, right? So one of the challenges for publishers is really proving why it's worth investing on your site than just finding someone generally. So it can do that. And it can also help to troubleshoot when brand equity dips. These same frameworks can be used by programmatic companies in deciding which sites are most desirable to seek out audiences on. And it can also really be used by advertisers or agencies when you're looking to invest heavily in one site or another. Okay, so site brand strength. So what we see is that site brand strength, right, is really the leading indicator in setting the table or not for a positive ad experience. But then we have these other two dimensions of audience dynamics and site personality. And what we see for these is that what we want to achieve is symmetry between the advertising objectives and the particular audience dynamics or personality of the site. So when we talk about audience dynamics, we talk about three things. We talk about everyday relevance, engagement, and then something we're referring to as visit catalyst. And so everyday relevance and engagement are really, some of the standard behavioral metrics we use, and visit catalyst is something that we saw that's new, that's emerging. But what these things are doing is they're really giving us, an accurate and holistic view of ad context. So what are these things briefly? So everyday relevance and engagement, as I mentioned, are behavioral metrics that we are already using. And so what I posit to you is that this study, has some new things. For most of us, hearing about brand strength is a new measure, but everyday relevance and engagement metrics are things that we already have access to and we're already using, right? And we are not at all suggesting to throw out the wheel on these. We are saying that these are components that you should be considering when you are making your placements, as you already do. So everyday relevance we're considering to be the traditional measures of reach, UVs, frequency, and share of the overall internet time spent on the site. Engagement metrics we're considering to be the length of time the visitor spends on the site and the number of pages visited while there. And then for most of you, there's this new context called visit catalyst. And what visit catalyst really is it's how does a visitor get to your site, right? Do they specifically decide to go there, or are they led there by a search engine or links from other portals or whatnot? And that's actually important too. How someone gets to a site is going to shape what it is that they're receptive to. So as I mentioned before, everyday relevance and engagement, right? These are industry standards. You're probably already getting this data from either Compete or from ComScore or Nielsen. And these are important, right? Reach, frequency, and engagement are absolutely important in deciding, where you should invest your efforts and your money. But Visit Catalyst is something new. So what Visit Catalyst is, right, is sites will fall somewhere on this spectrum of either wandering, right, so you're getting there from search or referral site, or destination. Someone is typing your URL or you're bookmarked into their browser. And what we see is that the sites that tend to be wandering sites are more things like food sites, where people are typing in the type of recipe they want to see, into search and getting it that way, or they're being led there from another site. Whereas sports and news sites, those are destination sites. Those are sites that people are going to automatically. And this distinction becomes important when we talk about, the advertising content itself, right? So then this is where symmetry comes in. So if our goal is that we want something like native advertising, right, or more long form advertising, the better place to put this advertising is on the sports and the news sites, because people are there. People are already in the mindset of long form content consumption, so you're more likely to have their attention in reading, your sponsored article or your sponsored post or something more long form than you will for food sites. In food sites, this is a great opportunity. Food sites are a great opportunity for programmatic, because people are most likely going to several of them at a time. There's a progression of different sites that they're going to, and there's really an opportunity to increase the frequency in a meaningful way. So if you could think about how you might search for food sites, right? You're looking at one, does that look good? Let me look at another one. So there's multiple opportunities to get people across different sites. So great opportunity here for programmatic. And then finally, site personality. So we've always sort of thought that sites have personalities, but what we see really is that there's a way that we can actually quantify a site's personality. And sites' personalities really come down to two dimensions. There's this idea of personality, and then there's this idea of pedigree, and I'll talk about each of these. So so personality, right? These are characteristics for things, for example, like how assertive a site is. Is the site perceived as friendly or fun? And then pedigree is really, how much does that site ladder up to a more established site? So think about the distinction of something like CNN, versus a vice, right, where one is more independent, or even a salon, right, it's a direct comparison. One is perceived as being more independent than another. So what we'll see in the second from those is that the type of the advertising you run is more consonant, should be consonant to the site that you're running it on. So dimensions of site personality. So the dimensions we see in terms of site personality that end up mattering in terms of how content is viewed are generosity, kindness, assertiveness, wiseness, idealistic or idealism, caring, fun, and friendly. And what we see is that for sites like finance sites, those sites are seen as being more assertive and more wise. News sites are seen as being assertive. It's the food sites that are seen as being friendly and fun, and then the sports sites less so. So the personality, right, should match. What you want to do is the personality of the site should match the personality of the advertising. What does that suggest? That for a friendly or fun site like food, you don't want to have your more serious message, that audiences are really more primed for that message in a finance type of site. Or other site that indexes higher on wisdom, assertiveness. Okay, and then in terms of site pedigree, right, site pedigree is really about how a site ladders up to a more offline site. And what we see is that depending upon the type of site, right, they match up to different types of pedigree. So when we look at pedigree, there's certain qualities that people are looking at. So for example, newspapers are really perceived as being very straightforward, whereas digital is perceived as being different. TV is perceived as being trustworthy, newspapers are perceived as being trustworthy, and portal domains are perceived as being playful. So again, this idea of matching content, right? What is the tone of the advertising content that you want to run? Okay, so now match that tone to the types of sites that you're running on. Okay, so to talk a little bit about how do we put this theory, right, this concept, into action, I'm going to pass it over to Hannah now to show you all a case study that we did that shows how these dimensions can come into play in helping you make decisions. So Hannah, I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. So based on the questions that we were getting from our publisher clients and sort of the study that we've done, we're starting to roll out a publisher impact solution. So what does that actually mean? So the idea behind it is a customized version of this study where a publisher can pick the content category that they want to measure as well as define their own competitive set. And what it does for a publisher is help them to get a concrete brand score, which is a way to communicate value in a very direct and quantifiable way, as well as to understand what their strengths and differences are. So getting analysis along those 5 other dimensions helps the site to understand how and where they're performing in order to optimize on those strengths and to try and fix the weaknesses that they may see. So the case study that we're going to present for you is ESPN, and it's looking at the sports category in general. So one thing to note is that we tested 9 different sports sites, including ESPN, and those sports sites include multimedia sites such as ESPN, but also sports sections of portals and independent blogs, some of the smaller sites as well. And that's really just to get a wider variance in there. So unsurprisingly, ESPN outperformed in the category with a brand score of 91, which is extremely high for any of the sites that we actually tested. So what's interesting to see is that while the range of brand scores for the sports category is quite large, so from 70 to 90, or 70 points from 20 to 90, the majority of the competitors all fall into that middle range, which shows that after ESPN, there isn't really a second place site that has a really strong brand. So there's still sort of room for people fighting for that next spot. But what does this mean in terms of ad outcomes? So the question is, how well does ESPN set up a visitor for an ad experience? And the answer is very well. So when we're looking at each of those 4 ad metrics, we have them indexed on a scale where 100 is the average score for a sports site, and you can see that ESPN outperformed across them. So ESPN, advertisements on ESPN are more likely to be perceived as fitting on that site 36 times more than the average sports sites, as well as being trusted 34% more than the average sports site. So these numbers are really important to a site because they help to justify premium prices. It also helps to differentiate themselves and say it's really worth investing in us and doing custom programs to get at these additional benefits that we see from having people trust those sites or actually liking the ads that they're seeing on those sites. Further, we can look into what is driving these scores. So in those three main brand metrics, which are meaningfully different and salient, we see that, again, ESPN is outperforming. So their main strength is salience, where they're 170 times more salient than the next sports site. So what that really means is that when you think of sport websites, the first one that's going to come to mind is going to be ESPN, which is really important. We also see that they perform well in terms of being meaningful, and what that means is that when visitors think of what they need from a sports site, they feel like ESPN meets that need. They have a genuine affinity towards that brand. As well as they're seeing it as being different. So when they think of all the sports sites in the world, they think that ESPN does sort of differentiate themselves. Of the three metrics, this is the one where they might want to work the most because it is the lowest score, really trying to prove that they're setting the trends and that they're being unique. In terms of visitor trust, we see that they outperform on-site trust as well as shareability. So shareability is kind of interesting because we see that it's generally correlated to people going to that site in order to watch videos and look at photos. And given that sports sites in general have a lot of video content just due to having things like highlights or recaps of games, this is really important and an important metric for them to do well on because it'll increase the likelihood of people sharing that content and building their brand. These variables generally help ESPN to understand what makes them different and what their strengths are. So when they're looking at this compared to how the competitors are scoring, they can see where those big differences are and really focus in on those when they're talking to advertisers or agencies. In terms of the next two dimensions, so in audience dynamics, talking about everyday relevance and engagement, since these metrics are more, or these dimensions are based more on behavioral metrics, it's unsurprising that ESPN performed very well. So in general, ESPN is a high traffic site, so second highest in the sports category, but also with an average of 6 visits per person in a month. It shows that it's a really relevant site for everyday use. So this is important for them to understand and to work on because if an advertiser is doing a long-term campaign on ESPN, they can be relatively sure that people are going to get high numbers of exposures to that campaign and higher numbers of frequencies, which is something important when you're trying to build something like awareness. So understanding these two metrics, again, help to optimize the types of campaigns that are running on those sites. So in terms of visit catalyst, which is sort of this new audience dynamic dimension that we're mentioning, ESPN is on the destination side of the spectrum. So people are really going there to visit topic-specific content. And they're not just generally searching, sports results and then getting to the site from there. People know that they're looking for something particular, they type in ESPN into the search bar, and then they go there to consume that type of content. The implication here is that integrated ads or native advertising will work particularly well on a site like this. Because people are already looking for sports-related content, having ads that are related to sports and integrated and actually offer that sort of value is going to perform better on a site like this as opposed to someone who's just wandering through and randomly clicking on links to look for something, a particular piece of information. But this also relates back to sort of that brand score. So what we did here is we're looking at how those sites divided up again by the brand score indexed against people going to that site to consume topic-specific content. And we see that sites with stronger brands were the sites that people went to for that topic-specific content. And that intuitively makes a lot of sense. What it's saying is that people are thinking about a specific type of content, so let's say sports. They then think of what the most salient sports site to them is, which is ESPN, and then they go to that site. So these two things are very related. And the point of this is mostly to show that while we've divided up these 6 dimensions into sort of these 3 different groups, they're all very related to each other. And performing well in one can help to inform a stronger performance in another. So the last 2 dimensions that we're going to look at is that personality and site pedigree dimension. So this is a perceptual map looking at all the attributes that went into both of them. So along the horizontal line, we have the personality dimension, which is also marked with the orange attributes. And along the vertical axis, we have the site pedigree dimension, which is marked with the yellow attributes. So it's really interesting to see that along the personality dimension, ESPN is definitely towards the more fun and friendly site, but so are all of its competitors. So when it's coming to differentiating itself in terms of personality, all sports sites are viewed very similarly. So they're not going to find a lot of room to sort of differentiate themselves along that axis. Where that axis might be more useful is they're differentiating themselves against a different content category. But along the site pedigree dimension, we see that ESPN is definitely seen as more of an institution site. So here we see there's actually quite a large range, with some sites at the top being very independent sites, and other sites like ESPN, which is part of a multimedia company, being seen as more of an institution. And the benefit from that is that they're associated with being more trustworthy as well as more straightforward. This is important in terms of advertisers, for when they're considering advertising on ESPN. They can more serious brands that are perceived as more serious can consider advertising there, as well as sort of the units that they use can be a little bit more in terms of the long-form content and more straightforward. But it also gives ESPN the ability to decide who they're going to go out to talk to, so whether or not that is a more serious brand. So what we've shown you is just a portion of the results that are included in that publisher impact solution. Realistically, the way that a site performs and the strengths and weaknesses that they show when they're getting their scores and performing along those dimensions help to inform where that analysis is. So the main goal is to really help a site get that concrete brand score, but also to show what they should be considering, what advertising will work best or optimally, and how can they best set the stage for any of those advertising experiences. If you're generally interested in the solution or more in the study, you can always reach out to us at the email that's listed right below the thank you.
Thanks so
Great,
much,
thanks, Hannah. So, you know, we'll give you a few minutes to ask any questions, to let those questions come in. So if you have questions, there's a questions box below where you can type things in. So far, what we've been asked is, will this study be available? And the answer is yes. After this webinar, you will receive an email from us that we'll send out to you that has the full study within here. We were also asked if this is something that we did as a custom study, or if it's something that is available to do more as a product. And the answer to that is this is actually something that you can buy as a product for your sites, right? To index how your sites perform. So we'll give you another minute or so to add any questions in that you might like to, and then hopefully we can answer a few more of the questions that come in as they're coming in. Okay, we'll give it a few seconds. Hannah, can you just speak for a second about how we chose the sites for this study?
Sure. So the way that we chose the sites was we looked at sites, one, just making sure that they were large enough so that we'd be able to find people that had been on them, so looking for some of those big players. But then we also wanted to add in sites that were seen as sort of different within that category. Since a lot of those scores are relative rankings, it's important to get a wide variance and a wide range of sites in order to really be able to tease out those differences. So that was sort of our criteria for picking sites.
Great. Okay, and do you have any suggestions, Hannah, for how you see this this working for programmatic entities?
Yeah, so for programmatic entities, it's really about, you know, understanding what that brand score, that role plays, and then using that as another tool for optimizing. So a lot of audience-based buys already can optimize based on sort of what the literal content of an article is or a site, but it doesn't really take into effect that brand effect from that site. So it's really using that as another tool for optimization.
Great. We were asked a question about the size of the sample. The size of the sample was 4,935 respondents. We were aiming for 1,000 per category, and then we took data from the compete panel over a 1-month period of time. The next question that was asked on here is if there were any suggestions for for where to run along the fun and friendly dimension. And I think, the answer to that is, so the first answer is, right, like a lot of that depends on how the site indexes along those categories too. So the best thought there is, you can look at it two different ways. You can look at the categories that you want to run on, but also, within a category, some sites index higher or lower on certain dimensions than other sites. So something to consider for that is, not just food sites and portals, which as a category index higher, but also within a category, right? Which sites are performing that way. Okay, I think let me just see if there's some more questions on here. How are the characteristics for personality and pedigree determined? That was part of what was asked in the survey. Okay, great. If there's a few other questions that come in, we will attempt to spend some time to also answer your questions after this. But with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah to close it up.
Great. Thanks so much, Joline and Hannah. I think you covered just about everything. We are going to be reaching out to attendees after the webinar with next steps and where you can find copies of this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the email on your screen, or you can also visit www.millwardbrown.com/digital/publisherimpact. And with